Welcome to Let's Get Social. Hello, my name is LaShawn, and today we will be sewing McCalls 8379. It's beginner friendly, has only 10 pattern pieces, and will only take about 3 hours from start to finish. So let's get into it. Let's start with the front bodice. To minimize stretching, you will sew a stay stitch on each inward curve about a 1/2 inch from the cut edge. Start at the edge of the fabric and then sew inward. Then, with right sides facing each other, you will pin each dart matching the circles. Sew each dart starting at the outer edge. Repeat this step on the other side. There are 2 darts on each front bodice. At this time, you can cut the seam allowance of each dart to 3/8 inches and press, or you can serge the seam allowance. Next, grab your bodice back or pattern piece number 2. You would have cut it on a fold, so open it up with right side facing up, and then with right sides facing, pin the bodice front to the bodice back at the shoulder and then at the side seams on the left and on the right side, and then sew. It is important to remember that when sewing the right side, leave the section open between the 2 circles. This will be used at a later time to pull the tie through. Next, we're going to apply the facing to the bodice. Grab piece 3, the bodice front facing, and piece 4, the bodice back facing, and with right sides together, matching the notches, pin piece 3 to piece 4, and then sew. Next, with right sides together, pin and sew the facing bodice front and neck edges, matching the notches and the seams. Next, press the seam allowance toward the facing and understitch. You have now constructed the front and the back bodice. You should trim the excess seam allowance throughout the bodice. You can also serge the seam allowance for a nice clean finish on the inside. Then press the front and the back, and then we'll move on to the next step. Now let's move on to the sleeves. There are 2 darts in each sleeve. To make the dart, fold the fabric right sides together, matching the markings, pin, and sew. Next, sew a stay stitch around the sleeve cap. This will prevent it from stretching out of place. Then with right sides together, pin the sleeve seam and then stitch. Repeat for the other sleeve. Then fold under the lower edge of the sleeve by 1/4 inch, press, and then stitch. Repeat for the other sleeve. Now let's add the sleeves to the bodice. Next, turn the bodice inside out. Lay the bodice front facing up, and then turn the sleeve right side out and insert the sleeve into the armhole, lining up the raw edges, matching the seams and the notches, and then pin. When sewing the sleeve into the armhole, make sure that the raw edges are lined up and there is no bunching. Follow the same steps to insert the other sleeve into the other armhole. Once complete, you have now added the sleeves to the bodice. Let's take a look at the bodice with the sleeves from the front, from the side, and then from the back. Please note that I have added about 3.5 inches to the length of the sleeve to give a little bit of a longer sleeve. Now, let's move on to the skirt. Grab the pattern piece 6, which is the skirt front. It should be 2 pieces. With the right sides together, match the notches and sew the 2 pieces together, creating a center front of the skirt. Now grab pattern piece 7, which is the skirt back. Mark the center backs and pin the back to each side of the skirt. Now, it is important to know that the back pieces are not the same. Be sure to mark the back right and the back left so that they are attached to the correct side of the skirt. When you finish attaching the back skirt to the front skirt, finish the raw edges of each back skirt by either turning under and stitching or serging. On each side, turn the back skirt to the inside on the facing lines, press, and then baste across the upper edge on both the left and the right back. Next, we will attach the bodice to the skirt. Now, this can be a little tricky, so the best way to demonstrate this is to pin the skirt onto the dress form. With the right side facing, I'm going to pin the bodice onto the skirt, starting by leaving 5/8 inch seam allowance and then pinning the right section of the bodice front and back to the skirt front and only the right section of the skirt back, stopping where you marked it at the center back. Once that section is pinned, then we will sew it. Next, we will construct and attach the waistband and tie. Grab piece 9, which is the waistband and tie, with right sides facing, fold on to the fold line and pin across the unnotched edge, stopping at the circle marking, and then we're going to sew. We're going to trim the excess seam allowance around the stitched area. We're going to stop at the circle and clip to, but not through the circle. Now, open out the facing from the right bodice front, and with right sides facing, you're going to pin the free or unsewn edge of the waistband and tie, and then we're going to sew. When pinning, remember that the lower edge of the waistband and tie should be about 5/8 of an inch below the lower edge of the bodice. Trim the seam allowance, and then we're going to turn the waistband and tie right side out. Now your first tie is complete. Let's take a look. Now, lay the left side of the skirt right side facing up. Then, with right sides facing, pin the long notched edge of the waistband and tie to the left skirt back, and then sew. Now, to create a clean finish to the inside of the garment, turn under the free edge of the waistband and tie and slip stitch over the seam on the inside and then press. Now grab piece 10, which is the tie. Now grab the completed portion of the dress, then open out the facing from the left bodice front. And then with right sides facing, we're going to pin the notched end of the tie to the left bodice front and facing, and then we're going to sew. We need to remember that we also have to have the lower edge of the tie 5/8 of an inch below the lower edge of the bodice when we are pinning. Next, with right sides facing, we're going to fold the tie on the fold line and pin all the way across the free end and the long edge, and then we're going to sew. Yes. Once we finish sewing, then we're going to trim the excess seam allowance, and then we'll turn the right side of the tie out. The last step is to hem the lower edge of the dress. It is recommended to allow the dress to hang for a couple of days before hemming. To hem, you're going to turn the lower edge of the hemline or your preferred length, open out the facing from the left and the right back of the skirt, either hand base or use an invisible stitch. Then you're going to turn the back facing to the inside and sew the side edges of the back and right skirt. And you are done. You have completed this beautiful dress.